Hey everybody, Eric Schweitzer here. We're taking a look today at Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2, and I'm joined by the gamer's resident 40k expert, Ben Sledge.
Hello. Expert is a strong word, but I like my 40k.
Who can be an expert? You have to
I
be
know
a
there's so much,
historian.
200 novels and 40 years of source books. But anyway,
Let's say admirer.
strong admirer.
Yeah. Before we get into the gameplay, what is it you like about 40k so much?
Um, I was drawn into it as a child, a kind of preteen, by the grandeur and the scale and the gothicness of the
Hmm.
science fiction it does. I hadn't seen anything like it at the time, and it's spaceships that are the size of planets, and they're just cathedrals, and it just really spoke to me more than a kind of sleek enterprise spaceship. I just loved the kind of the religious aspect and the gothic aspects of 40k, and that drew me into the game itself, the tabletop game, and then I was down the rabbit hole by that point.
Yeah. I think with any Warhammer game, it's obviously it's important that it's a good game, but then it's also important that it's a good Warhammer game. Do you think this is a good Warhammer game?
This is a better Warhammer game than it is a game.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's a great Warhammer game. It's a good game.
Great Warhammer game. Good game.
Yeah,
Okay. So I never played the first one, and I've only barely dipped my toes in this one. And it's from what I've played so far, not quite what I expected. But I guess first question: how close is it to the first one?
yeah, it's very similar. There's a few subtle changes. The enemies are different. The first one focused mostly around orcs, and then some chaos came in towards the end. Whereas this time we've got the Tyranids.
Hmm.
Um, I I find that quite refreshing. I like the change of enemies. I miss the orcs yelling "Space Marine" all the
Hmm.
time, but I think the Tyranids are a good challenge. I like their addition.
The Tyranids are great. They're very swarmy
Yeah,
and they're very xenomorphy.
yeah,
Even in the first mission, it does feel like an alien game sometimes.
yeah.
But also the way that you can just fight a million of them. You know.
Yeah, it looks great, and this kind of swarm engine they've got to get that horde of gaunts rushing at you. It feels really epic, for want of a better word. Like
Yeah.
you are, and this is where the fact that how it becomes a great Warhammer game is that you feel like a super soldier just mowing down these hordes of enemies. Um, and then it gives you some interest within the hordes. There'll be, you'll be surrounded by the little gaunts, and then there's a Tyranid warrior. On its
Hmm.
own, that's an easy fight, especially just one of them. But when you've also got to do a, slightly different tactics for dealing with the horde as well as the warrior who's in that, the bigger fighter, you may have to parry his attacks and stuff like that. Then it gets a little bit complicated, and you've got to start thinking about what you're doing rather than just mashing buttons.
Yeah. Yeah. Tactics is definitely the right word for it because it feels like if you take all the different pieces of the combat, it's very relatable to a bunch of different games.
Mm.
Um, it's I know this is one of your favorites. God of War, I think, is a good comparison for the melee, but it's also very like Gears of War in its
Yeah,
gunplay. And then you kind of have both of those happening at the same time, and sometimes you're trying to quickly mow down a big group that's coming towards you, and then suddenly you're doing combos on some guys that came up behind you, and it's a very interesting mix of different types of combat systems.
yeah, and you've got to switch between them all on the fly. I think that there's almost a Souls-like aspect to the parrying as well. Like, it's nowhere near that kind of difficult, but there's influence there, I think, but it never feels overwhelming. It's always quite quite easy to know what you should be doing, which style of attacking you should be doing, when to swap to a ranged weapon, when to throw a grenade, when to launch yourself into the air with a jetpack. Like,
Mm.
and it all feels fantastic. The combat, especially the hand-to-hand stuff, like the thunder hammer, it feels like you're cracking skulls beneath it. Like, and that's where the power fantasy comes in as well. Like, without really good crunchy combat, this game would have flopped. But it's got
Yeah, it's very heavy,
yeah,
very brutal. And then, like you mentioned, the parry. There's a lot of like very cinematic parry moments where the Tyranid is like launching itself at you from a
yeah,
distance, and you're grabbing him and smashing him into the ground. And
and the
yeah,
executions too. When
yeah,
you get an opponent quite close to dying, you can you push in your thumbstick, execute them in a great cinematic shot. You're ripping spines out, crushing heads in a power fist, and you're also restoring your shields a bit. So there's a gameplay element to it too, but it looks great. And
yeah.
I spent far too long just pausing to get into photo mode to get the like action shots of that kind of
Nice.
stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, Titus, is that his name?
Titus, that is his name.
Not a guy with a lot of finesse, but yeah, it's like every hit is a big sweeping with the chain blade,
Chainsword.
chain sword, and yeah,
Yeah,
he's like taking out 4 or 5 of them with every swing, and the heavy attack is like a stomp that knocks everybody back really far.
yeah, yeah.
Super
Space
brutal.
Marines are not subtle.
Yeah, and then getting back to that swarm tech you were talking about, the end of that intro mission, it's kind of a Left 4 Dead hold your ground encounter, but it's very World War Z in the way that it's just like tens of thousands of Tyranids coming at you. It's so many, you think there's no way they expect me to fight all of these, and then you do. You have to fight all of them, and they pile on top of each other to climb up these walls to get to you, and you're just firing into a crowd of them, and you know that they're dying, but it feels like you're not even making a dent in this
Yeah,
giant swarm.
it balances it brilliantly where it looks insurmountable but is achievable. Especially with those swarms, the climbing up the vertical walls, like you were saying, the World War Z stuff. I I hadn't watched many of the kind of trailers going in, and that really impressed me. I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, I thought I was safe on the high ground, but the Dalek can fly. Like, that's
Yeah.
yeah. Um, no, yeah, the tech there is really cool.
Is there a lot of that stuff throughout the game?
Yeah, there's a few more. And yeah, definitely there are more hold your ground missions. There's obviously you've got the Carnifex boss fight at the end of that tutorial mission that you have to fail. You die. Well, you
Mm,
don't. You get saved. Spoilers slightly.
yeah.
There's more boss fights as well. They're very varied, especially as about halfway through the game, the Thousand Suns appear, and they're Chaos Space Marines. So that's a different enemy you've got to fight. You have to change your tactics again for fighting them. Um, but yeah, a lot more swarms, a lot more bosses. Yeah, it all feels pretty
Mm,
great. The the one thing I will say on that, with the two different types of enemies, you never face the Tyranids and the Thousand Suns at the same time.
mm,
The Tyranids feel more difficult to deal with than the Thousand Suns, which doesn't feel right. Um, Both from a lore perspective and from a kind of difficulty curve as the game goes
mm,
on perspective. And it's because of that swarm of Tyranids surrounding you as you're trying to fight one of the tougher Tyranid opponents. That's, for me, where the difficulty lay, in dealing with two kinds of foes at once. And the Thousand Suns never really have that. They do summon some kind of beasts, some Zangors they're called, but it's not on the same scale. So you can just 1v1 a Thousand Suns Marine. You can isolate them from the rest of the, the group of attackers, and that, it makes it a lot easier. Even though I think it's good to change up the enemies. They're really cool in the design. There's new executions. But I felt like the game got easier as it went on, and I wasn't, there's no RPG mechanics. I'm not upgrading Titus. That felt a little bit odd, and that's where I kind of get the feeling that this is a great Warhammer game, but just a good game. There's a few of those design decisions that don't quite work for me.
That's so interesting. That reminds me a lot of Alien Fireteam Elite, a game nobody played but me.
No, I did not play Alien.
the first 2 acts, like roughly the first half of that game, you're fighting xenomorphs, and they behave a lot like the Tyranid. There's the drones that are easy to dispatch, and then there's like the big armored warrior guys, but you're fighting lots and lots of stuff. And then later in the game, and you're fighting androids instead, and it's more of like a cover shooter, and it's not as dense with enemies, and they're not nearly as hard as trying to control these crowds of xenomorphs. It sounds like both games sort of have the same trajectory.
Yeah, from what you're describing, that sounds very similar. If you put a Thousand Suns Marine in a swarm of Tyranids, it would be harder than the Tyranid Warrior. Like, 1 for 1, that's the difficulty is increasing, but without the swarms, it's just far easier to have target priority and pick the right one. And I've died a lot more to the Tyranids than the Thousand Suns.
What's the level structure? Is it totally linear, just one mission after the next?
Yeah, pretty much. So each level is very linear. You just get your objective. It's basically move to this part of the map, and then, oh no, the elevator's broken, so we gotta go and fix that. And you face, scripted hordes of Tyranids or Thousand Suns. I can't tell. I didn't replay levels enough to tell if there's some kind of AI behind that which sends you different like mini bosses and stuff. But yeah, it's very linear throughout the campaign. However, there's a PvE mode that kind of runs like a cooperative one. You can play the campaign cooperatively.
Yeah.
But then there's separate cooperative PvE missions.
Oh, okay.
And there's 6 of them, and they act as a sort of like they're happening parallel to Titus's events. So you can play as a custom character in them. You unlock currency to upgrade the cosmetics of that character. You can paint it in whatever chapter you'd like. You can choose your weapons that you go in and your class and things like that. But again, they're quite linear as well, but there's an interesting interplay between them, especially if you play them in kind of chronological order and dip between the Titus missions and what he's sent, a reconnaissance squad off over here to this area of the planet. And then you can play that with a completely custom build.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And how is the structure of those levels different than Titus's levels?
They're a bit more open.
Okay.
There's a lot less narrative to them. There's no cutscenes that I can recall, really. But structurally, they are similar. But I think it's the mechanically with the class system, they feel quite different. So I always put the jump pack on my guy because it's the most fun thing in the game to just shoot into the air and then come down on a horde of Tyranids with a thunder hammer and just superhero landing and all that good stuff.
So they're meant to be replayable. These are like co-op mode.
Yeah, they're meant to be. They are exactly the same every time you replay them.
Ah,
The developer does promise to add more with each season, but I don't know how feasible that is, to be perfectly honest, and how many they'll be able to do.
geez, I didn't realize this was a live service thing.
Oh yeah, of course. It's got PvP mode that's going to be the main live service element.
Is that in the game already? PvP?
Yes,
Okay.
I didn't play much of it because there weren't many people online during the review period.
Okay.
So I can't speak too much to it, but again, it's a little weird. You've got this campaign where you've got the power fantasy of being a space marine. You're so much more powerful than any opponent. As you said, you're knocking about 5 Tyranids out with every swipe of your weapon. And then suddenly you're fighting other space marines controlled by other players. And that power fantasy is gone completely. Like,
Right.
there's a level playing field. And I played a few hours of some PvP, and it was good fun, but without that, without the hordes, it just doesn't feel the same to me.
Yeah. Is melee combat even like viable in PvP, or is it really a shooter at that point?
In the first game, the Thunderhammer was like the meta
Okay.
option. I haven't played enough of the second to tell you whether that will still be the case. But melee has been viable in the past.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. I know so little about this series. I did not even know it had PvP.
There's a lot of aspects to this game. It's
Yeah.
they've put a lot in, and I don't know if it would have been better if they'd have picked one and it had been more streamlined. I'm not sure though. Maybe the PvP will prove me wrong and it'll be great and thousands of people will love it.
Yeah, because I know in your review you mentioned not being entirely impressed by the story.
Oh yeah, the story is threadbare, but that that's fine. Like, I don't think you play this game for the story. If you're a fan of Warhammer, you like seeing the little nods, the characters who make cameos. Like, they're nice little things. But each mission and each cutscene between the mission is just an excuse to get you to punch more enemies in the face.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That's all I wanted from this.
Yeah, I played a ton of Vermintide 2, and I played
Mhm.
some Darktide, which I probably need to check out again, but it didn't quite live up to Vermintide. But
It's
that's
had a lot of
another.
changes, to be fair.
Okay, yeah, I should check it out. That's a game that doesn't have much story to speak of either, but it's the how how well it captures the 40K universe, right? It's like
Yeah.
the experience of being in those environments, and little voice lines do enough. I know that there's some cutscenes, at least at the start of Space Marine 2, that you're just sort of experiencing the culture, the Space Marine culture, and that's sort of enough.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely more story than Darktide or Vermintide in Space Marine 2. But it's not something you're going to be gripped by. And that's fine. And then towards the end, the cutscenes grow more epic, and there's some really cool just shots that visually look stunning as the story's like coming to its crescendo. And it does fill you with that feeling of, oh, this is cool. But it's not a story I'm gonna think about for a long time. You have no agency in the story either. Like, there's no decision making at all. You can't even pick dialogue choices.
Right.
But yeah, again, I think that's fine.
I'm looking at the roadmap, and it's giving me a stomach ache. And I guess at least you can say that there is a full single player / co-op campaign here. As short as it may be, as threadbare as the story is, it's not as though we've just put out a live service game to die. But at the same time, like, wouldn't you have preferred to see Space Marine 3 in 2 years instead of this this
I
2-year
would have.
plan?
Yeah,
Like,
I
wouldn't
definitely would have.
everyone?
But and especially as they're making more of the kind of cooperative PvE missions that aren't really a part of the narrative of the game,
Yeah.
but kind of are. I would obviously I'd prefer them to be a fully fleshed sequel. But I think that's just the gaming industry being the gaming industry.
Yeah, it's tough. It's like I don't know who looks at this stuff anymore and gets excited.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Space Marine though, it's it's got the iconic uh, stuff in it to make fans of the IP excited about a roadmap like that. So when they see that next season there's a Dark Angel skin, every Dark Angel player will go, yes, I want that skin to
Right.
play in PvP. Whereas in something like Apex Legends, it's just a different color on the same
Right.
guy. You know, even the live surface bits are stuff that means something to Warhammer fans.
That's fair. Yeah. You see esport potential here?
Nope.
Didn't really have to think about that one too hard, huh?
No. It's
Yeah.
good fun. There's no it's not particularly well balanced. It's made for fun,
Yeah.
and that's where it should stay.
Cool. Yeah, it's a cool game. I think your even as a super fan, your review feels very measured.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of action third person shooters. It
Yeah.
doesn't do anything new in the genre. You
Yeah.
you get to the end of a very narrow path, and then there's a load of ammo for you to pick up, and then you go to the boss arena. Like gameplay wise, it's a bit rote. It's
Mm-hmm.
been done before, but I think it all comes back to that combat feeling so good that you don't mind. You don't mind
Yeah.
that there's no story. You don't mind that the gameplay's a bit tired from a level design perspective. It just feels great to smash up a load of Tyranids.
Yeah. Nice. Cool. All right, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. We've got the full review linked down in the description. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and visit us at thegamer.com. That's the gamer, no spaces.